actually did not want to be an entrepreneur. The only example of entrepreneurship I had growing up was not a positive one. And so growing up, I just wanted to do great in school, get amazing degrees, and have a good corporate job in a reputable firm and never get fired. And well, here I am, good Indian girl, getting great grades in school, going to grad school and doing whatever years of school and all that stuff. And I meet and fall in love with a high school dropout who is nevertheless successful and smart and hardworking and ambitious and driven, and I love him. But our journeys were just so different, right? We had such different paths to where we're now. And so it makes me appreciate that there is not just one path to success. If you are a woman of color in a mostly male, white-dominated context, you're going to feel like you need to be much better, much smarter, much more productive than other people in order to be seen as equal. When I was in corporate, it took me a while to feel confident and comfortable and realize that I'm smart and I have something to offer. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I am not white and I'm not a guy in a setting that's mostly male and white. And so if you're in that situation, I would say,
welcome to Visionary Voices, a podcast where we connect with forward-thinking entrepreneurs to learn from their stories. I'm your host, Ida, and today we are joined by Bhoomi Pathak. Bhoomi's journey into entrepreneurship is one which she herself describes as an interesting transition. From the well-organized and process-driven structures in Fortune 500 companies, where she worked in finance, project management, and consulting, to now joining her husband in his entrepreneurial journey, where together, you guys have built what is one known as Mirasee Inc. Guys, we're in for a treat today. Welcome to the podcast, Bhoomi.
Well, thanks for having me, Ida. I've been looking forward to this conversation. We've been talking about being immigrants and entrepreneurs and that whole journey for many months now. So excited to dig deep into it.
You guys are in for a treat today. Okay, so you described your own transition into this as an interesting journey. Can you give me some background story, Bhoomi? And did you always want to be an entrepreneur?
I actually did not want to be an entrepreneur. The only example of entrepreneurship I had growing up was not a positive one. So,
okay,
growing up, my parents moved to Canada when I was 14, and immigrant parents. They had a hard time finding a job when they moved here, partially because they didn't speak the language, partially because their credentials were not accepted. This is probably, true for all of us.
Yeah.
And so growing up, I just wanted to do great in school, get amazing degrees, and, have a good corporate job in a reputable firm and never get fired and just continue to climb the corporate ladder.
And you did that?
I did do that, yes. For the first, I want to say 15 years of my career, that's what I did. And then at one point, I was probably in my early 30s, and we were, starting to plan a family. And, I'm looking around. I was in consulting at the time. A lot of people in consulting, they're traveling to projects, and I see my senior managers and my partners, they're, rushing out of the office at 4:00 to be able to pick up their kids from daycare or school or what have you. And then they're coming back at 7:00 at night and back to work for the next, their night shift. And that was the norm. And I wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to continue doing once, we were starting to think about having a family.
When you said shift, it's actually not a really nice night shift, right? It's just so much work that you really couldn't get out and you had to come back to continue some work.
Yeah. And that's the expectation, when you're at that level in an organization, in a corporate setting, and you want to be at that level because you want to be successful. That's the expectation, that you're going to be putting in those hours and you're going to be on your phone on weekends and weeknights, and, everyone else is doing it. So if you don't do it, then you're left behind and you're not seen as someone who's as committed to their career, I suppose.
So what precisely was it that made you leave? Did something, because you kind of knew that going in, right?
I did. And it was actually, it was a really good experience for me. I'd want to put it down because I learned a lot. I was working with very interesting and very successful and very smart people. And I had a lot of experiences in my consulting firm that I wouldn't have been able to have had I not done it. It really made it so that, the 7 years or so that I was in consulting, I really had the experience of someone who worked in a normal environment for 10 years or whatever. So super interesting work also. But at one point I was looking to make a change and I was like, oh, well, I don't know what I want to do next. I know that I don't want to do consulting. I want to be part of an organization where I can see projects through and I can have like a longer term impact than I can as a consultant. And at that time, Danny, my husband, his business started to take off. So I was employee number 6, and this was 10 years ago. And yeah, we're still working together.
Interesting. And so I know I mentioned this to you before. For those listening, if you're really into podcasts, they do have a podcast called, part of the Mirasee FM network, but they have For Better or For Work, which is you and Danny, and it's very interesting. So if you guys want to go check out something, definitely go check that out. So now, coming back to what you're doing right now, you described it as an interesting transition. And when I was listening to you on one of your podcasts, which is with Sharon, To Lead is Human, you did go into certain things. So what was it that was super different between that experience in corporate and now actually being in an entrepreneurial journey where you are like everything depends on you guys?
Yeah. So when you're in corporate, you're aware of things, especially financial related stuff. So when I was in consulting, I was a manager, and so I was part of the management team, and we would look at sort of like what our cash forecasts look like in terms of project pipelines, and I knew what our burn was, and what's coming, what marketing efforts we're going to do to bring in more projects and stuff. So I was involved in those conversations. But those conversations took on a whole different level and feeling them very viscerally when, I suddenly became responsible for payroll of my employees. And so it's like, we're looking at our cash flow forecast and we're looking at our sales and like, yeah, I mean, the conversations are similar in the sense that, where do we bring in revenue from and how can we finance things and what costs might we be able to cut? But the responsibility of having to meet payroll every 2 weeks, like that, it's hard to explain that to someone who's not an entrepreneur because it weighs on you, and you realize that there isn't a money tree magically somewhere that'll just pay my salary.
Yeah,
it felt like when I was in corporate.
Yeah. Oh my God. So I do have a friend right now who is at a place where I think you were at like 13, 15 years ago, where she just recently left her secure corporate job.
Yeah.
And she's diving into entrepreneurship. And I think she's trying to figure things out from like pricing, from her niche and everything, like all of that, coming from that security to now dealing with the entrepreneurship. So if you think back to your journey, and she's a mom, so if you think back to your journey, what are some things that you could advise her on?
Yeah.
What she needs to focus on within the next 3 months, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd be curious to hear what your answer would be to that as well, because I think you've, certainly have interesting insights on that topic. Yeah. So being an entrepreneur is different. Obviously it's different than being employed. But something we don't realize when we're employed is the support structure that we have in place around us. Mm-hmm. So we have bosses and we have, admin assistants. We might even have employees who report to us. We have a tech department. We have network or pipeline of potential customers that we can reach out to, and all that support structure that we take for granted in corporate suddenly does not exist anymore when you're on your own trying to build your own business.
Yeah.
And so, that can be a little destabilizing at first, and it takes a little bit of getting used to for sure. So just be aware of that and be compassionate with yourself if you feel like you're not being as effective or as productive as you're used to being. Like I remember when I joined Danny and, I would work a whole day and I'm like, I'm not sure what I accomplished today. And then, and then at one point I started time tracking. It's like, where is all my time going? I don't understand. I'm used to performing at a high level. And then, a lot of time was spent on like figuring things out that I would not have had to figure out if I was in corporate. So just be compassionate and gentle with yourself. I'm sure, a lot of us are very driven and ambitious and we want to perform at a high level. And as you're transitioning into something new, you're going to have to figure out a different rhythm that works, that makes you that focused and that productive. And so, give yourself time to find it. And then, the other thing that comes up for me from a business and marketing perspective is really just getting very quickly and very clear on who you're serving and what you're selling, and then testing out your offers with potential customers and understanding how they resonate, and getting to sort of that product market fit where, you can be like, okay, if you put me in front of my target client, and my target client is a woman between 30 and 40 who is, for example, left her corporate career and is looking to launch into entrepreneurship, and who's used to having a white collar job and a white collar salary and is now looking to, do something more meaningful and more fun. That's my target customer. Like, that's the level of detail you want to describe them in. And I help them take the initial steps to launching a business, for example. That's my offer. And I price it at $297 for a course. And, if you put me in front of that person, 6 times out of 10, I'm going to enroll them into my program. Like, you want to get to that level of clarity in terms of who you're serving, what you're selling, what's your price point, and what's the messaging that leads them to want to continue to work with you. The quicker you can get there, the funner I think the journey becomes, because being in sort of that pre-revenue phase is not fun, and it can be very stressful especially if you've just left a lucrative job and you're like, well, how am I ever going to match my salary from corporate? And it doesn't, it's sometimes it doesn't feel feasible, right? But the sooner you get to the product market fit stage, then you can start thinking about all the growth opportunities that can lie in front of you. So that's probably the most challenging part. It's the getting to the product market fit.
Yeah.
What's been your experience, Ida, with that?
So the first challenge for me when I left corporate and decided to do entrepreneurship on full time was that realization that the 2-week paycheck isn't coming. If a check is coming, it's going to depend on you. And that was that was the first thing, like, oh my God, what did I just do? So I think everybody gets to that phase, and then you remember why you left in the first place. And there was something that pushed you away from it, and there was something that you were being pulled to. So if you could remember that thing that was pulling you, and remember that going back is not an option, then you get that burn, that fire in you. It's like, okay, you got to make this work because you've burned those boats already. You're not going back there. So I think it's at times trying to find the thing that's going to balance you in terms of something I heard to say, it's the push and the hawk. The push being like, okay, I'm running away from something. I need to push myself to go and do this thing, but also the hawk, like, have that compassion on yourself. Like, okay, like, you're doing everything that you can do right now. Take it easy, but don't take it easy. It's like this, you got to balance that out for yourself, as opposed to when you're within a corporate setting. Yes, you have that security of there's a check coming, and now you just need to worry about those deliverables. Like, you have to worry about both sides when you go to be on your own. So it was that first thing for me, like, if a check is coming, it's going to depend on me, and then actually making it happen. So, yeah.
I'm curious, were you ever tempted to kind of be like, okay, this is, because, when we leave entrepreneurship, when we leave corporate rather, to do something new, and it's the case for any new project you're going to take on, you start with what's called uninformed optimism, where you're like, everything's going to be rosy, this is going to be awesome, I'm going to have so much fun, I'm going to have a zillion clients, I'm going to make so much money, it's going to be great, it's so much better than where I am right now, right? So that's, but it's not based on anything, it's not informed by reality, right? Yeah. It's just a vision you have, which is what's pulling you in part towards doing something new. And then you start the project or your business, and it's like, oh shit, like, there's so much to figure out. I don't know where my next, paycheck is going to come from. I have to, I tried this thing, it didn't work. Clearly I'm, not feeling great now, and maybe I'm not even cut out for this, and all the self-doubt and the, whether I'll make it or not comes in. So that's sort of like the informed pessimism phase. And then there's the, you start to figure things out, and you're like, okay, I think I'm starting to get a handle on this. Look, I figured out this one piece, and now I have to figure out this next piece, and I see a path towards sustainability and towards, fulfilling career.
Yeah.
But it's in the, and so that's like the informed optimism. So now we know what's coming, and we're excited about it.
Yes.
When you think of yourself, Ida, when you were in sort of that informed pessimism side of things, what what made it so that you stuck with it, that you didn't, you're like, okay, this is too hard, I'm just going to go back to corporate? Like, what was it that made you want to continue the pursuit of your vision?
Two things come to mind immediately. Number one is the fear of failing and proving other people right. Like, I told you so, this is not going to work.
Oh, yeah.
So there was that part. It's like, this has to work, right? And then the second thing was just thinking back to not even caring about what any other person said, but just thinking back to what was it that caused me to leave that place? And if I go back, I know myself, I'm going to be there for X number of months and then I'm going to feel the same thing that I felt. And I would want to leave again. So why do this and then go back and come back? Just stick through and find the thing that you don't know right now. And so for me, what has actually worked was when those two things are like, okay, like I identify those two things, the next thing for me is like, okay, what do I need to learn right now that I don't yet know? And that's where I would go to maybe find a mentor, find somebody who knows something that I don't and ask them a question, or I'll go get a book on something that I want to learn. Somebody whose book I read a lot, or I've read some of his books, is Alex Hormozi. I'm sure you know him. And everything you talked about, the uninformed optimism, informed pessimism, and then the next one is the valley of despair. And then it's like, oh, I got it. And then you go back to the next. I heard him talk about all of that. And so I'm like, yeah, that was me. And I could say that was me, but that is still me because it never ends. It's a roller coaster thing that you're always in, and you just need to have that. I think a lot of people say you have to have a big enough why, because that why is going to take you through those difficult moments of like, oh my God, why am I doing this? I'm curious for you. What has it been?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And, it's a cycle that keeps repeating, right? The goals might be different, the situation might be different, but the emotional cycle is very familiar. And it's true in not just business and entrepreneurship, it's also true in other aspects of our lives. So I think understanding that cycle and knowing that cycle is definitely helpful. So you're like, oh yeah, I'm pinpointing, I'm at this part of the cycle. And okay, the next thing is going to come is going to be this. And I've been through the cycle before, and here's what I did in order to help me get past this point into a better option. And so, that's what I need to do now. And like you said, seeking out mentors, seeking out books or courses that will help you figure out what that next step is. It is super helpful.
So at your current role at Mirasee, you work a lot with the coaches and consultants and in helping them to start and scale their business and all. What is something that you find a lot of people miss?
So when someone is just starting out, when I talk to people, oftentimes they have this idea for a business. So it could be a sales consultant, for example. It's like they're used to doing sales training internally within organizations, and now they want to go and create their own company where they're doing sales training, but not as part of a company, but as their own sort of consulting and training company. And a lot of times people come to that and they're super attached to, this is what people need and I know how to teach them, and this is what I want to do, this is what I want to teach, and this is how I want to work with people. So they come in with oftentimes, not everyone, but oftentimes they come in with a very strong idea of what it is that they want to sell and how they want to deliver what they want to sell. And that's not based on what the market needs or wants. It's based on probably what they didn't like in the previous situation that they were in. So if they were used to doing a lot of in-person trainings, they're like, I don't like flying everywhere and I don't want to do in-person trainings. I'm going to just have an online course and I'm going to deliver online courses, and that's how I'm going to make revenues, right? And but it's more helpful to come at it with a perspective like, there are many things I can do and there are many ways in which I can sell, and I'm going to listen to the market and I'm going to interview people that are my target customers, and then I'm going to craft an offer that they want, instead of coming in with a very specific idea of, this is what I want to sell and this is how I want to deliver it, and then I'm just going to try to find people who are going to pay for it. It's much easier to sell things that people already want, versus trying to sell things that you don't know if you want or not. So that's one thing that's
okay. So they come in with that fixed mindset, like this is what I want, and they are not flexible with. Even though you guys are the experts, they are like, this is exactly what I want, and they are not flexible about how they're gonna go about serving their clients based on what the coaches, the consultants, whoever is telling them, like, this is how it's going to work. You need to be flexible and look at it in this way. It's that I want it this way, and this is how it's going to be, and I need to make this work and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, it's actually exactly. And it's harder if you're an expert in a field, right? So if someone who's like, hey, I've been a sales trainer now for like 20 years. I know what people need. I know how to teach it. I know exactly what's going to get them results, which is great because people are going to pay for that expertise, but that sometimes creates blinders around what the market wants and a little bit lack of openness there. So I would encourage to not be super, to have, there's a saying, it's to have strong convictions, but be loosely attached to those convictions.
Right.
I think that serves well when you're in sort of that product market fit stage where you're still trying to figure out what you're going to sell.
Right.
And you're in product market fit stage until you've sold, I would say, at least $5,000 to $10,000 worth of whatever service you're selling.
And then you know it works.
And then you know it works. And then you can, you're like, okay, I think I've got something that people want. Now I just need to get more people that I want to serve. So then it's different. It's a different problem that you tackle. And then, you're building your business one piece at a time.
Okay. Did you always know these things? Because, so the skill set within corporate, it's kind of transferable, but it's very different when you get into the entrepreneurship phase. At what point did you realize that you're actually good at this entrepreneurship thing?
I mean, I don't know that I'm actually good at this entrepreneurship thing. I feel like I'm always learning.
Okay, like you don't suck at it. Let's use the other word. Like, oh, wow, I don't suck at this thing.
I'm definitely better at it than I was when I started. I feel like a lot of, so my, journey was I studied accounting in undergrad, then I did an MBA, then I went into consulting. Like it's gives you good skills to be able to manage projects and people and to organize things and, a higher level of understanding of business. But it's very different. Like it's not, I would say it's actually not helpful when you're trying to start a business, when you're in that phase.
Explain that.
So I was working in big companies, and big companies have already figured out a lot of things, right? They have a product that they're selling. They have processes in place. They have structures in place. They have like repeatable ways of doing things. And so you expect or you want that in your entrepreneurial company from day one, because that's what you think you should have, right? It's kind of like seeing the finished, someone else's finished product and comparing it to your starting point.
Okay, yeah.
And so your starting point, if that's the expectation you're going in with, it's like, I need to have like a fancy website because, I see company X, Y, and Z has a fancy website. So I must need a fancy website in order to sell my products. Otherwise, I'm not feeling confident in my conversations or in my outreach, and people are not going to take me seriously. And all these beliefs, they keep holding you back. It's like, no, you do not need a fancy website. Just, work on your LinkedIn profile, make sure you look and come across very credible. That's it.
I have said that to a lot of people. It's like, I need a website. No, you don't. The website is not the first thing you need. Create a landing page if you must have something. But when I look for you online, what do I find?
Yeah, you need clients. That's it.
Yeah.
And don't listen to people because there are a lot of marketers who are invested in selling you what they're selling, right? So it's easy to get confused around like, oh, I must need A, B, C, D, E. And then intuitively like, yeah, of course I need A, B, C, D. Look at that company. They have all of these things. And so I feel like you just kind of have to, again, it took me a long time to kind of stop comparing myself to more established companies. And I was lucky because I am married to an entrepreneur who's an entrepreneur through and through. And so the perspective he provided really helped me kind of like, oh, you're right. I don't need that. And, people love us. Our clients love us. That matters. and the relationship we have with them matters. And so that's what I'm going to focus on, because that's what makes it so that we're going to be sustainable. And so shifting focus to our clients and why they love us and how we can continue to do great work for them, like that. When I started focusing more on that and less on sort of like what we don't have, that got me really, that's when I think entrepreneurship got really fun and exciting for me.
Cool. Okay, so speaking of Danny, I heard in a podcast that he spoke on, I think it's To Lead is Human, and he mentioned something about one great thing about entrepreneurship, or one thing that most entrepreneurs would need. It's like, or businesses, they need the visionary and they need the integrator. So the visionary is going to go out and have all of those big fancy ideas, like, let's do this, let's do that. It's like, okay, create this, create that. But they still need somebody who balances them out to be that integrator. Within your setup, would you say you're an integrator, or would you say you're both kind of on the visionary side?
No, Danny would definitely be the visionary. And I'm definitely more on the integrator side, but the two can be completely divorced from each other.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just trying to pull the business in opposite directions. So the visionary needs to have, and I'm lucky, Danny's pretty good at it. He could play the role of an integrator if he had to. He just doesn't like it. But he's open to, pushback, and he's open to agreeing that there might be constraints and resourcing issues, and being able to envision how this might play out and how we might roll it out. And on my side, I need to be able to connect to his vision, and I need to be able to understand it. I need to be able to advance the vision so that it's more refined and it's better than it would be if he just came up with it himself, so that it becomes mine. And then it's easier for me to figure out the implementation or the rolling out of the vision, and to be able to bring people on board, to be able to further it, and then give it the energy it needs to then have it be realized.
How did you guys find the balance, or how did you figure out? Okay, because I also heard you say from the beginning, you kind of had to, you guys kind of had to find what role you would have within the company. You knew you wanted a change. You knew that wasn't what you wanted anymore, as in the corporate, okay, I've learned everything I needed to learn here. Maybe there's more, but it's time for me to move on and try something else. And then you joined him, and then you guys continued to build and everything. But initially, it wasn't clear cut, like, this is exactly what you're going to do, and that's exactly what Danny's going to do and stuff. How did you guys figure out who is going to do what and just fit so nicely into your roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, one mistake that I see a lot of people make, especially if they're working with family or their significant others, is that they, the typical scenario is there's an entrepreneur in the family. He or she is starting to see sales, and they're getting excited. They see a lot of possibility for their business, and there's a lot of work coming in, and they're super busy. And then they're like, okay, well, who can I bring in to help? Then they bring in their kids or their spouse. And then they're like, okay, well, here, you take care of everything that I don't like to do so that I can focus on things that I like to do. And you just figure out how to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not the best way to do it, because that doesn't take into account the person's strengths, their likes and dislikes, and their sort of, goals as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so just because you were too busy doesn't mean that that person is the best suited to take it on. So I think being more intentional in terms of what are the person's strengths, and it might take some trial and error to find out. Like the kind of work I was doing in consulting, there wasn't that role available at Mirasee, right? So, yeah. But then early on we figured out, project management is one of my strengths. And so organizing projects and rolling out new initiatives is something that I started kind of specializing in, I suppose. And it took a while. I would say it took a good 6 months to figure out where we then felt like, oh, wow, yes, this is fun. I'm excited about my role, and it feels complete, and it feels motivating. So it might take some time, but it's worth figuring out.
Can you think back to earlier, maybe even pre-Mirasee days, maybe to childhood stuff that showcased that this is this is a skill that you have, that right now when you do certain things, you look back, it's like, oh yeah, when I was younger, I used to do X, Y, Z, and it just shows through in what I'm doing right now. Can you think of any of such examples?
Yeah, for sure. So like something that I think back to school
Yeah.
and like we used to get projects. I don't know if you remember if there are projects and assignments that people get in schools, right? So it's like a science fair project, for example, or do this research project and work in teams. And so my favorite would be when I'm doing a project with a team of people, and my role is always the person who's standing in front of the whiteboard and capturing ideas. So I'm like, okay, great. This is the goal. This is what we're supposed to do. What are we thinking? How are we going to proceed? What is going to make us different? How are we going to ace this project? And then, capturing all of that, making sense of it, creating a plan, assigning tasks. And, I would always be the person who reviews it before it's submitted to the teacher because, I had a very control freakish tendency and I really wanted to get A's.
It's interesting that you say control freakish because a lot of times, right, the things that we are quote unquote punished for when we are much younger, those are actually the things that we're really good at and that this world actually needs. Like you could find a kid who is very quote unquote bossy. They're gonna say bossy, but it's because that's a person who's like she's got leadership tendencies, but she's gonna always get in trouble because she's pushing
Absolutely.
people around. So
Yeah.
so you used the word. What was the word you said? What was the word you used?
Control freakish?
Control freakish. Yeah, you use that, but it's your control freakishness that's made you into a good what you do right now, a good project coordinator, a good everything, COO, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, it makes it so that, when something passes through me, I need to make sure that the quality is high.
Yeah.
I've kind of toned down the control freakishness and, I believe more in like empowering my team and like coaching them into producing the deliverable that's great and stuff. And I have power now in a way that I didn't, when I was just a class project with a bunch of teammates and I couldn't yield my CEO shtick. So, I had to control everything, but like now I can actually rely on people and they want to do good work too and they want to excel too. So it makes it even more fun. Curious, Ida, what comes up for you when you think about that question?
Wait, I wasn't even thinking about that. I had another question for you, but okay, let me see. Let me think.
What was young Ida
Sorry?
known for? What was young Ida known for?
What was I known for? Let me see. I loved playing volleyball. So I loved sports. I loved dealing with difficult things.
Ah,
Yeah. So I remember when I was in secondary school, I went to school in Cameroon. So the way they call
yeah.
classes there are different from here. It's more like the British education. So the fourth year in secondary school is called Form 4. It's just the fourth form in school. So the first 3 classes, I wasn't really good at math. And then, because everybody else was. I wasn't good at physics because everybody else was. I just found it hard. And then when we got to the fourth, so Form 4, the fourth year in secondary school, we had a different teacher who was, everybody was scared of him. He just had this demeanor. It's like, no, we can't ask him a question or anything. So I realized that nobody understood math anymore. So it's like, now I have to understand it because nobody does. Because I think before it was more like because everybody understood it, I could always just go and ask somebody else the question, and I really didn't like if I don't know it, it's okay because somebody else will know and I'm gonna go ask them. In that class, everybody was kind of scared of the math teacher, so nobody really knew what to do, and so I remember then actually getting a textbook at home and studying ahead so I could understand. So when I got to class, even though I'm quote unquote afraid of him, I would be able to answer questions and I would kind of get on his good side. And so it was then that I got good at math because for the first time, I really challenged myself. There was something else to it. It was like, this is so difficult. It's difficult for everybody. I'll figure it out. And in that class, I ended up becoming one of the best students in math from the fourth year. And then it continued from there. Like, so people started coming to me. It's like, either we can't figure this out. Like, oh, you can't? I'll help you. The next class, either we can't figure this out. You can't? Okay, I'll help you. So when we went to high school, in high school, because now I'd already created this identity of I can figure things out. When we got to high school and they started another math project and nobody could figure it out, I went ahead and I studied it and I knew it. So when the teacher came to class, like, can anybody solve this? First one up. And I did it. And it was like, how did you figure it out? So I became the person who could figure things out when they're difficult. And then when it's too easy, it's hard for me. When it's too hard, it's easy for me. I think it's transitioned to now because
Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
studying and do taxes, right? And the things that are like easy for everyone, it's like, oh my God, it's so hard. And then when it's hard, okay, I'll figure it out. And then I do. And when it's done and it's easy, it becomes boring. It's like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So I think now thinking about it, that's probably one of the reasons why I wanted to leave corporate, because at some point it got too mundane and it wasn't exciting anymore. It wasn't challenging anymore. It's like, okay, I got to go figure out the next thing. So it's like, I'm out. So, well, not really like that, but now that you ask, I remember that those things have continued to what I do right now. And I've been known as a person like, oh, that's an Ida problem. So if people are trying to figure something out, they can't, like, give it to Ida, she'll figure it out. I just keep doing it. So
It became part of your identity. Isn't that beautiful?
it is. It is. And
Yeah.
that goes
And
back to that teacher who was scary.
yeah,
So I wanted to please him, and then I did. And I just started knowing things. So, I had to think about that one.
that's cool. I mean, look, like it's you can figure things out as being part of your identity. That's awesome. And something else that I picked up in your story was that everyone else was afraid of this teacher, so you became brave, and you found your courage, and that was really like fulfilling and motivating in a way that
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been if everyone else was not scared. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Weird. I never really thought about it that way, but yeah. Because like a couple of last year, a teacher from high school, one of my teachers from high school, the one who taught math, who, like, I just became good at it and then I continued going. But now this teacher from high school messaged me on Facebook. He's like, Ida, such a long time. I'm like, yeah, hey. And then we kind of went back and forth. And he said, I have a question for you. I said, what is it? He said, how were you able to figure out those difficult things that nobody else could? I'm like, I don't know. Because it was difficult, I just had to. I was like, okay. Because after me, there was one other student that he taught this. In all the students he's taught, there's two of us who could figure things out like that. One of the girl, like the other girl right now, she has a really good job. She travels all over Africa and she's working there. And then there's me. Like, yeah, like, wow. But I didn't think it was anything extraordinary. I kind of thought there was that kind of person in every class. So for me, it was just kind of, I don't know. And then for him to come back like 20 years-ish later to say there was just two of us. And he remembers. He remembers me. He remembers the other student, because I guess it was very strange for him that we could figure things out.
And when you think about the skills that you want your kids to have in the future, I hope that's one of the skills that I definitely want my kids to have.
Oh, yeah.
And to get good at is like figuring hard things out on their own.
Yeah.
And not necessarily just on their own, but like being able to figure things out and have confidence that they can figure things out.
Yeah. And because that is the strength, it seems to also be one of my weaknesses, to kind of not have patience with people who don't want to try to figure things out.
Yeah. Why would someone struggle with that? Why would someone not want to take it on, right? It's hard to understand.
Yeah. And it's not like I expect you to be able to figure it out. I just want you to at least try and see how you can figure it out. Maybe you can.
Get excited about it and get like...
I know. Oh my God, this is interesting. Okay. so I was going to ask you a question and now I can't remember it because we talked about so many cool things here. Lord. Okay. So I wanted to ask you something concerning your journey as a newcomer to Canada. You moved to Canada when you weren't born here, right? You moved to Canada with your parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was it like when you first came in terms of, how old were you? Teenager?
I was 14. I grew up in Mumbai, in India. So a very different context, very different culture.
Yeah.
Although Mumbai is very cosmopolitan, so we have it's not a uniform culture. There's people from lots of different cultures, all Indian, but India is a big country and, lots of subcultures and stuff. So when I moved to Canada, or Montreal rather, the first thing was it was exponentially more interesting because, not only did we have Canadians and people from India, but we also had people from all over the world. And the the ethnicities that I encountered in my high school. My first year in high school, it was a welcome class in Quebec because we had to learn how to speak French. So they put us all in one class, all the newcomers, and they taught us French. And so I met people from all around the world, and that was just my mind was blown, and like how interesting and exciting I found that, and like I can't wait to visit all these places and like travel everywhere and discover all these cultures. So
Yeah.
that's probably the most poignant memory that I have.
Do you remember how it was for your parents?
Very different. Whereas I was here getting all excited about like this new context, new environment, new freedoms as a girl, and in India is different from being a girl in Canada, obviously. And my parents found it super hard with not having economic security because they didn't have jobs. It took them a while to find jobs. Feeling a little bit fearful for their daughters. It's me and my sister, and I was a teenager. And, just like the idea of girls dating and like all that stuff and staying out late. And I think my mom probably had anxiety for the first 7 years, I think.
Oh my God. I spoke to a lady on one of my podcast episodes who had actually also moved here from Mexico, and she had moved as a teenager as well. And she said, very similar to what you said, it was very hard for her parents. It was easier for her, but it was also hard because at home, they were in Mexico, and out of home, okay, you can do whatever Canadians do, but once you step into the door, you have to do what we did in Mexico. So there was that confusion in a way.
Identity.
Yeah, that confusion of identity, and it's like, this is allowed, no, this is not allowed, and that kind of difficulty for the teenager trying to adjust as well to all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it wasn't the case with my parents for the most part. I'm probably not 100% accurate to remember, but I remember friends who were like, I can never tell my parents this, and I had friends who would smoke, and obviously their parents didn't know that they were smoking, right? So it's like that kind of thing. But I think I was a little bit oblivious to all of that, and I would bring stuff up, and we would have long conversations and debates. And one thing I would give my parents is that they were very open to conversation. So we could talk through. They might be super scared of the conversation, but they would always, be willing to have a conversation, and we would debate things. And sometimes they would like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then, they would adjust and adapt and change their worldview. And so I feel like that was really special in a way. And again, you don't realize it when you're in the situation because this is just normal for you. But like when I hear stories from other people, like I'm surprised at how open-minded my parents were and how open to being convinced that they're wrong. Like they didn't come in with sort of this like authority or monopoly on truth. And I think that was actually a gift to me and my sister, because that meant that we could have our own opinions and we could think critically about things and we could bring things up and we could argue our point and we could win. And so that, that was that was super great.
Yeah, I don't think that is common for most immigrant parents. So that was very unique in lots of ways, because there are things up until now I don't think there are things I could tell my mom just because of the way it is. Not because I'm afraid right now, but it's just not part of the culture to discuss certain things. So they won't get it. Maybe they will, but for me, it's just, oh, we don't talk about that, so I'm not going to talk about it type thing. Yeah. So,
interesting. I used to have those things with my parents too, but then over the last few years, I don't know. After becoming a parent myself, I feel like I understand them more. I understand where they were coming from more. So, I have 2 kids, and between me and my kids, it's not a cultural difference so much, but there's still a difference in terms of like how they view the world and how I view the world. And so when I was younger, I used to joke with my sister. It's like, hey, all the issues that our parents are struggling with, like, dating and like homosexuality and like, racism, like we're not going to have any of those issues with our kids because we're so freaking open-minded. And we're not going to, it's not going to be an issue. We're not going to fight with our kids ever at all because what are we going to fight about? There's nothing to fight about. We're still on the same page.
So has reality finally set in?
Exactly. Reality finally sets in, and I find myself feeling very strongly about things with my kids. So, for example, one of the things that I have is like, well, I always had to get good grades in school. My kids don't have the same drive, I guess, to get good grades in everything. And I'm like, but how can you not? Like, how can you not want to get good grades? It's like, why are you not studying right now? You have a test tomorrow. What is wrong with you? And so it's not cultural, but those kinds of conversations are still happening because we're raised differently.
I guess it's always going to happen because as parents, I guess we just want what's best for our kids. And to us, what's best is what we grew up knowing as best, which is have good grades. So you
Exactly.
want them
Because
to have good grades.
we turn out great. So like, why would they not? They need the same thing to turn out great.
So it's interesting because, okay, so I interviewed Danny a couple of weeks ago, and the conversation came up where he talked about one of your kids bringing up a conversation about school and traditional schooling. And well, no, he didn't bring up, Danny spoke about traditional school, about traditional schooling is more like a thing of the West and or whatnot, and people find that as the end all be all. And I'm paraphrasing there. And one of your kids had brought up a thing about not liking school, and he went into the conversation being all open, thinking that it was going in the direction of like, don't want to go to school. I'm curious to know what is your take on that? If your kids were to be like, Mom, I don't want to go to school, what would you say to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I just want to give you a little context before I answer that, right? Like,
okay.
So here I am, good Indian girl, getting great grades in school, going to grad school and like doing whatever years of school and all that stuff. And I meet and fall in love with a high school dropout who is nevertheless successful and smart and hardworking and ambitious and driven. And I love him. But our journeys were just so different, right? We had such different paths to where we're now. And so I guess it makes me appreciate that there is not just one path to success.
Right.
I feel like as a parent, that's been one of my bigger learnings. It's like there isn't just one path to success. There are many paths to success, and people find their own way. And so, we've had many conversations. So, my son is the one who's like, I don't like school, blah, blah, blah. And so it asks, okay, we can homeschool you, but you had to be in charge of your learning, and you still have to learn because, both Danny and I, we both value hard work, we value learning, we value excelling at whatever we care about. Mm-hmm. And so whatever shape or form that takes, the how, I'm less attached to at this point. And it's more like, and even when it comes to grades, I'm like, okay, well, do you care about this? And then you should work hard at it. If you don't care about it, then it's okay. I can lighten up a little bit on that because, I needed to get good grades. I needed to do all these things in order to be successful, but they don't. They have a different life.
Yeah. It's so interesting how our backgrounds shape everything that we're doing without us actually realizing it, right?
It's like fish in the water. You don't even realize you believe that. There are times, I'm not going to lie to you, there are times that it has occurred to me. It's like, what am I doing to myself? Like always, discussing and arguing and like being open to sort of like different paths. It's like, it'd be much easier if I had just,
if you just had one path to take,
had the same trajectory as I did, then I wouldn't have to like open my mind, but now I'm forced to open my mind.
Yeah. Well, but that's good. And that's not just about parenting. It's about everything, right? Because traditionally, thinking about school, it's go to school, get out, get a job, and this and that. Entrepreneurship was not really a thing. And now we're realizing it's also a different path, that it's okay and it's not for everybody. You got to love it. You got to want to do it to take it. But if you want to stay in corporate, by all means, it's fine. There's not just one path to it. Yeah.
Especially I feel like for, I guess for immigrants, I feel like entrepreneurship is maybe, I guess, no, it could feel very open, but it could also feel like that's not the path. I don't know that my parents would have encouraged me to be an entrepreneur, right? It was be the safe, stable profession where you're always going to be in demand because that's their experience in terms of what made them successful. So
yeah, fair enough. And a lot of immigrant a lot of people who I speak to who had immigrant parents or are immigrants themselves,
Yeah.
we heard this thing where you gotta be a doctor, accountant, a lawyer,
Exactly.
or you're a
Yeah.
nobody.
Yes.
So that is,
Engineer comes in sometimes as well in that.
yeah. Now, from our side, it doesn't even. But right now, yeah, it does. It's doctor, lawyer, accountant, or nobody. That's the sentence. So,
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
oh Lord, this is good. This is good. If you were me, Bumi, what question would you ask you that I haven't asked?
Well, I'm more now interested in questions that I can ask you, but
Okay,
maybe
go
that's a
ahead.
different podcast. What are some things that you wish you had told yourself if you had sort of like a time machine where you could go back 15 years? What are a few things that you would have told yourself that would have made your life at that point easier?
You're on the right path. Trust yourself more and do it. That will be the first thing. And I'll expand on that. So I'm an accountant, right? And I run my own company that I actually just got to doing full time within the past 2 years or so. But this business has been incorporated since 2014. And I started it and I went back to corporate, and then I came back to it and I went back to corporate. And it's like, and every time I go to corporate, it reminds me exactly of why I left in the first place. And I'm sitting there anyway. And so this time it's like, okay, this time this is it. I'm not going back anywhere. So even with lots of opportunities coming at me, every time that I left, an opportunity would come, which is like more than what I left before. It's like, you sure you want to do this? Okay, just go back to corporate. You gotta, it's a bigger paycheck. And so I kept going back and forth on it. And when I look at people who are in entrepreneurship right now, who just started and just went, and they're like, I've been doing this for 10 years, and you see where they are. And I can't even say I've been doing this for 10 years because I have, but I haven't, because I started and I left and then I'm back. So I've literally been doing this for like 2 years-ish, but it's been 10 years. And so if I went back and I spoke to myself, I know this is what I want to do. I know corporate is good, but and I don't want to say my personality, but my range of things that I like doing doesn't quite fit into a box in corporate. And so I never really fit there, because I've worked in accounting, and which accountants do podcasts? I've worked in which accountants do YouTube, which accountants do that. And for me, I just want to do that. It's part of me. And so I would always feel like I'm stuck in a place that I don't belong. I want to solve this problem and I want to finish solving that problem and move on. But there's no role that just like, okay, you're just solving. It's always so. So if I were to go back and talk to myself, that would be one. Be like, you're on the right path. Just trust what you're doing and keep going and don't look back. That would be one. Another thing I would probably say to myself is, what people think or say doesn't really matter as long as you can pass the pillow test. And the pillow test would be when you go to put your head down on your bed, and like when you're about to sleep and you look back at your day. Did you do everything you said you were going to do? Or do you feel good about what you did today? Is it in alignment with who you are? And if it is, you're fine. Keep going. So it's now, like now with everything I know and the things I do and all of that, I think I just have more freedom in myself to feel comfortable in what I do without worrying about like, stop trying to fit into that box, because that box is not for you. You don't fit in a box. You're you to go be you. So those are things I would say to myself.
I mean, I can imagine like you're a Renaissance woman in a black and white accounting world. If you go back to corporate.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Interesting question. Okay, so to wrap it up, if you could think of somebody who is in a position that you were in 10 years ago, who just needs to hear a message from a person like you, what would you say to them so that they can get out of that place where they're stuck in and just go be themselves and be what they're meant to be?
So if you were, I would say when I was in corporate, I felt it took me a while to feel confident and comfortable and realize that I'm smart and, I have something to offer. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I am not white and I'm not a guy in a setting that's mostly male and white. And so if you're in that situation, I would say, if you are a woman of color in a mostly male, white dominated context, you're going to feel like you need to be much better, much smarter, much more productive than other people in order to be seen as equal. And A, that's probably not in your head. That's probably accurate. And B, that doesn't have to be a bad thing, because that means that you can be confident that you're really good at what you do and you really have a lot of value to offer. And then I would kind of, stand in that conviction and voice your opinions and speak up, and you'll be noticed, because that's the other advantage of being a minority, is that when you speak, you get noticed. And it's great, because that means your ideas it's like your ideas have a megaphone, right? So stand in the conviction that you are really good at what you do, and use that megaphone that you get for being a minority.
That is beautiful. I got nothing to add to that. All right. So if someone wanted to reach out to you, to connect with you or connect with Mirasee, what is the best platform to reach out to you on? And any closing words?
For sure. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. There is only one Bhoomi Pathak in Montreal, so it shouldn't be hard to find. And if you're looking for resources on entrepreneurship, on launching your business as a coach or consultant, you can go to mirasee.com, and we have lots of free resources for you to check out. And, I just want to say, Ida, thank you for having me. And it's awesome that you're doing this podcast. And I wish there was a podcast like this when I was growing up in corporate and starting my entrepreneurship journey as a minority. So way to go.
Awesome. Good to hear. And thank you guys. We're going to see you in the next episode. For more insightful conversations with entrepreneurs, check out this video right here. I think you'll love it. Continue to enjoy, and I'll see you there.